My guest today is Douglas E. Noll, who left a successful career as a trial lawyer to become a peacemaker. His calling is to serve humanity, and he executes his calling at many levels. He is an award-winning author, teacher, trainer, and a highly experienced mediator. Doug's work carries him from international trainings to helping people resolve deep interpersonal conflicts, to training life inmates to be peacemakers and mediators in maximum security prison. In today's episode, Doug and I talk about ways to listen other people into existence and how to calm any angry person in 90 seconds or less. Welcome to LIFEOLOgy.
Thank you, James. Great to be here.
I am looking forward to this. I don't think you know this about me, but I'm sure you don't. My first year post-master's and working on my doctorate, I worked at a maximum security prison, and I was I'm like 24 years old working in a prison. So when I read your backstory, I was like, yeah, I know how that is. It's interesting. I have many stories of, there's this one individual, amazing person. But at the moment, I didn't think so because he was known for knocking out the warden, but he got right in my face and he said a couple of things to me. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to die. But once again, I was able to talk him down, and then he was removed. But yeah, it was an interesting time as this young little 24-year-old kid who didn't really know what he was doing. So I'm looking forward to hearing your expertise on peacemaking. So as you were a trial lawyer, what kind of law did you practice?
I was a complex commercial and business civil trial lawyer. So I took on cases that usually involved vast amounts of money with very complex legal issues. And I did that for 22 years.
Wow. So what made you change? You want to become a peacemaker?
Well, that's kind of a long story, but very briefly, I started studying martial arts in the 1980s. And after I obtained my second degree black belt, my teacher fired me. He said, "You're too aggressive. You're an asshole. Get out of here. Go learn go learn Tai Chi." It was right. So I started studying Tai Chi, and Tai Chi has two paradoxes. One is the softer you are, the stronger you are. And the other is the more vulnerable you are, the more powerful you are. So I didn't get that at first, but eventually it's soaked into my soul until one day I was trying a case and cross-examining somebody, and the thought came to me, what the heck am I doing in here? And after that trial, I had a vacation planned, and I spent that vacation thinking about my work and decided that I just wasn't going to be a trial lawyer anymore, but I didn't know what I was going to do. Yeah. So I came back after that vacation and drove down out of the mountains to my office, and I heard a public service announcement for a new master's degree in peacemaking and conflict studies being offered at Fresno Pacific University here in Central California. And the Fresno Pacific is one of the West Coast Mennonite universities. And the Mennonites are one of the three traditional peace churches. So I'm not a Mennonite, but that caught my attention. And ultimately, I enrolled at 48 years old, mid-career, to earn a master's degree on top of my law degree. And it completely changed my life. My mentors it was very, very stimulating and very rigorous intellectually. So I really learned about human conflict at all different levels. And that's when I began my study of neuroscience. I was fortunate to be able to be tutored in the early days by John Allman, who was a professor of neuroscience at the California Institute of Technology, Caltech in Pasadena, California, where I grew up, and came to realize that everything starts in the brain. And ultimately, I left a very successful practice in 2000 to open my peacemaking practice and mediation practice, and best decision I ever made. So that's the short version of what happened.
That's incredible.
And I literally walked out. I gave my firm 1 week's notice. My partners gave me
really? Wow.
Well, one of my partners gave me an ultimatum, and I called him on it. He didn't think I'd call his bluff, and I called his bluff. And said, I quit. And everyone was shocked. I left $10 million on the table and just walked away.
Wow. What is a peacemaker?
Well, a peacemaker is somebody who is, in my opinion, somebody who's been trained and is highly skilled at walking into really dark places where there is extreme conflict and high emotion, and able to help people work through their conflicts to resolution and, with luck, reconcile their relationships.
Sure. Do you do this with the police as well, or for any
I have done about 150 criminal cases, criminal mediations, victim offender mediations, where I've worked with victims and offenders. I have talked to a lot of law enforcement agencies about my training, and they're not too interested in it for reasons that are understandable.
Sure, I get it.
And as you mentioned, of course, I've been working for the last 12 years in prisons all through California and in Connecticut, training lifers and long-termers how to become peacemakers and mediators. So,
with everything you've done, the how you grew up, all your law, and then the person with whom I'm speaking today, what's different and what's the same since you become a peacemaker?
Different and the same in terms of what?
Who you are. Different.
Who I am.
Different.
Oh my
What's
God.
different from them
I've
versus
changed.
who you are today?
I've actually grown up to being a real adult.
Oh, good to know. That's funny.
I grew up with a lot of disabilities. I was born partially blind, crippled, partially deaf, bad teeth, left-handed in 1950. And in those days, nobody knew what to do with a kid like me. So I had a really, although I grew up in affluence and privilege, and was gifted with a superior mind. Emotionally, I was a wreck, and I hit it with arrogance and aloofness, but inside I was a mess. And it wasn't until after I earned my master's degree, left the practice of law, and really started working on my own inner emotional environment that I really started to grow up and mature and learn about vulnerability and authenticity. And that was a long journey. It's not something you had
sure,
to,
yeah.
It doesn't happen
everyone
overnight,
it would be.
as you know. So I am the happiest I've ever been in my life. I really feel like my life started after 50. And that was my childhood. And now I'm living a very fulfilled, satisfied life, doing what I love to do, serving humanity in many different ways. I couldn't be more blessed.
Congratulations. When people hear the word peacemaker, and that is for some people they know obviously what peace is, but being peacemaker, are there ways in which people who haven't studied this, are there ways, because I know we're going to get to the topic in just a second, but there are ways that people can just kind of, if someone calls themselves something, if you believe something about yourself, whatever you think about is, determines what you feel determines how you respond. With the lessons you're going to be teaching us in just a second, if people start to have the mentality of, yes, I want to move towards peace, is that something you teach as well as if you have the mentality of this is what I want to be, then all of a sudden you can be that?
Right. That's the experience we've had in the prison project. Incarcerated people are attracted to our program. They self-select in because they like the idea of becoming a peacemaker, and they're wondering, what is that about? And I'm tired of the violence. How can I stop violence? How can I find peace within myself? And how can I help other people find peace? And that's the concept of peacemaking. And we train people in the very specific skills of what it takes to be able to do that work, both inner and outer.
Oh, that's impressive. I know what we talked about in the pitch, what we're going to talk about today is how to listen other people into existence and how to calm any angry person in 90 seconds or less. Walk me through the first part of that, of how to listen other people into existence. I found the wording really interesting. I get conceptually, I understand it, but what does that mean though?
Well, that phrase came from a circumstance where I was training middle school teachers, classroom control, using these skills we'll talk about in a minute, called affect labeling. And one of the people in the circle, we were doing a peace circle, and we'd finished the circle, and I was debriefing everybody, finding out what their experience was. And one of the women in the circle was a fairly high-level school administrator, not at the school level, but at the district level. And she said, all my life I've been invisible and ignored and not heard and not respected. This is the first time in my life that I actually felt like somebody listened to me. I felt like I was listened into existence. And the light bulb went on. Oh, so that's where the phrase came from. And what it means is that, as you know, 96% of all families are emotionally dysfunctional. And that means they produce emotionally dysfunctional adults. That's what keeps psychologists like you in business, and mediators and peacemakers like me in business. Sad to say. So people are emotionally invalidated as children. They are severely emotionally abused. Even in the most loving families, parents still severely abuse. They don't even know they're doing it. But every time you emotionally invalidate a child, you're destroying their brain. And by emotional invalidation, I mean saying stuff like, well, remember when you were 2 years old and you were out running around and you fell down and scraped your knee and started crying? What were you told? Suck it up. Don't cry. Be a big boy. Don't be a sissy. Don't be a girly girl. Big boys don't cry. That's emotionally invalidating. It's basically telling you not to feel. You're being taught implicitly that emotions are bad, they're evil, they're irrational, they're weak, and that if you want to survive in life, you've got to be tough and not feel anything. That's just utter BS. And it's a total lie. And it does more to destroy a child's brain than anything else other than physical abuse. And there are all kinds of studies out there that show this. So we all suffer from this because our parents suffered from it, and their parents suffered from it. It's been going on for generations, and nobody knows that it's insidious and pervasive, and nobody knows it's abusive, but they just do it because they do it really to soothe their own emotions. The reason that people emotionally invalidate is because they've got a child who's upset. They don't know how to manage or regulate their own emotions, so they feel this anxiety. So they tell the kid to shut up, stop crying, because if the kid shuts up and stops crying, they won't feel anxious anymore. So emotional invalidation really comes from a very selfish, unconscious, selfish place. Well, the problem is for the child and for all of us is that around between 4 and 6 years old, if we're invalidated enough, we learn that emotions are not safe. And so we go in and we build a wall, an edifice around us that this is who I am out here. See, I look like I'm really put together and cool. But on the inside, I'm scared and I'm vulnerable and I'm hurt and I'm wounded. Again, this is what keeps psychologists in business, right? So when you listen somebody into existence by listening to their emotions instead of their words and reflecting back their emotions in a way I can describe in a moment, you penetrate that wall. And people feel deeply heard for the first time in their lives. And they feel emotionally safe for the first time in their lives. And it changes everything for them and for you as the listener. And that's what I mean by listening another person into existence. Oh, I've lost your audio.
Erik Erikson is he was one of the major developmental psychologists who talks about how kids grow up. And so with the ages that you're talking about, 4 to 6 years old, if people are taught in a way that not to be validated, this is the time when kids really determine if they're going to actually try something new or not try something new. And so It's either they're encouraged, with encouragement is also validation. If they're encouraged to do something, they'll separate and they will try new things. But if people are not encouraged, then they won't try that. So that's when you find a lot of people who let's say going for sports, they don't want to try sports because they don't feel validated, or try something new. If they try something new and they don't do well, then all of a sudden they feel that they failed. So this is really the early childhood aspects is if where people trust themselves because they've been encouraged. And so they either try new things or don't try new things based off that. And unfortunately, individuals in that situation, that also leads to trust when it comes to relationships. So they don't trust other people. They're very careful. And this leads to attachment disorders, et cetera. So just corroborating what you're saying is exactly, if someone is not emotionally validated, then they don't feel like they can try something, they don't feel like they can try something new. And they often become inward and insular and not really show up in the world in an authentic way.
That's right. And that's why so many relationships are unhappy. And so many relationships are not intimate, and so many relationships are superficial, and why there is so much unhappiness and anger in the world, because people don't feel fulfilled inside themselves because they've been invalidated all their lives. And in my world, as a peacemaker working in conflict, this is the origin of all conflict. And people fight because they're looking for something, and usually that something is intimacy and authenticity and feeling real. And they don't get that, exactly. And so they tend to argue and fight about it. And it doesn't have to be that way.
Sure, exactly. As we know, anger is one of the 6 primary emotions, but unfortunately, when it's used to protect us, that's healthy. But when it's used as a defense mechanism, we're not actually in danger. We think we're in danger. We perceive, or people think we're in danger, so therefore we use anger, and that's really not what it is. There are actually 5 different anger payoffs, which says, help reduce emotional conflict, or to manipulate someone, or to all these different things that people do when they use anger. But it's really not anger. It's just this protective shield that they use to protect the vulnerable feelings on the other side. So that would make sense as a peacemaker, that when people are demonstrating all this anger, it's probably not anger that they're showing, but if they don't know how to show anything else, or that's what they do to protect themselves.
Right. And they become alexithemic, and it just becomes a reactive pattern that they fall back on. And anger really masks about 6 or 7 emotions that come under anger. And so when we learn how to affect label and reflect emotions at a deep level, or listen other people into existence, we learn how to look for the layers of emotions that are under that anger, because that's where the real validation has to occur.
Yeah.
So
what would be some ways in which today you can teach us how to listen other people into existence?
Very simple. Take out your pens and papers, ladies and gentlemen. It's a 3-step process. Very easy to describe. Takes a little practice to master. But the first step is, when you're confronted with somebody who's emotional or angry, the first thing you have to learn how to do is ignore those angry words. It just becomes white noise. You're not ignoring the person. You're ignoring the words, because in emotional communication, only 7% of the content is in the words. The rest of it is nonverbal. The second step is to read the emotional data fields of this angry person. And emotions are data, just like numbers on a spreadsheet. And due to evolution, we have an innate ability to read other people's emotions accurately, quickly, and efficiently without any effort whatsoever. It's a totally unconscious process. We're really, really good at it. But because we privilege rationality over emotions, we never develop this innate ability, and it just lies there dormant until we start to use it. And the way you do this is to simply keep your mind quiet, be in silence, hopefully not in panic mode. And if you wait for just a couple of seconds, all of a sudden, emotions will start flowing into your consciousness, and you'll be able to understand not just the anger, but everything that's underneath it. And there are 6 layers of emotions that I've developed that you can work with. And then the third step, which is where the secret sauce is, and this is counterintuitive and counternormative to everything we think we know about listening, is that you reflect back that emotional experience with a simple use statement. So I would say something like, James, you are really angry. You're pissed off. You feel disrespected. Nobody's listening to you. You feel completely unappreciated and disrespected. And you're anxious and worried and concerned. And you're sad. You feel completely abandoned and betrayed. And you feel completely unloved. And notice how all I did is reflect back 6 or 7 basic emotions. And those are the typical emotions that are underneath the anger. What the brain scanning studies show out of Matthew Lieberman's lab in UCLA, starting back in 2007, is that when you do this, a couple of things happen in the brain. First, the emotions, the parts of the brain that are associated with emotions, like the amygdala and other limbic system regions, are inhibited. Those systems are inhibited. At the same time, the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex is activated. That's the executive function of our brain. And it happens in an inverse relationship. As the emotional centers quiet down and the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex activates, all of a sudden, people calm down. And it takes about 30 to 90 seconds for this to happen. And Lieberman figured all this out in some really seminal brain scanning studies in 2007. And so affect labeling turns out to be an extraordinarily powerful way to calm people down. It's that simple. Sure. And you continue to label you continue to label and reflect back emotions until 4 things. You're looking for 4 involuntary relaxation responses. Nodding of the head, some kind of verbal response like, yeah, a dropping of the shoulders, and a sigh or an exhalation. And when you see those responses, you know that the emotional centers of the brain have quieted down, the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex is back online, and now you've de-escalated this person. You've listened them into existence, and you can either problem solve or do whatever is appropriate in the next step. The thing that's really different, I was going to say, the thing that's really different here is that most people are taught active listening, which is based on the work of Thomas Gordon, who was a psychologist in the 1950s, who was a protege of Carl Rogers, the great humanist psychologist. And his work was completely misunderstood and misconstrued by the human potential movement of the 1960s. And that moved into the therapy world and the mediation world. And even today, people are still taught to use I statements. And we all know that I statements don't work. It just pisses people off. And you say, what I think you're feeling is anger, right? It's bullshit. And the reason that I discovered and developed these skills is because as a peacemaker, I get paid big bucks to walk into some really hairy conflicts. And I had to have a tool that worked the first time, every time, without fail. And active listening and nonviolent communication, now called compassion communication, none of that stuff worked. And so I had to figure out something else. And it was only through trial and error and, my study of neuroscience that I finally figured out that using a you statement was the powerful way to do this. And in the beginning,
have you ever had people who would say that that's not like, let's say you would say this to them, like, no, that's not what I'm feeling. I mean, although as I say that aloud, as I say it aloud, it makes sense.
That doesn't happen very often. It's very, very rare. But here's what's happening. If you say, I say, James, you're really angry, and you say, I'm not angry, I'm frustrated, right? So you are angry. I was right. You're wrong. But I'm not going to challenge that. I'm going to say, okay, you're really frustrated. Nobody's listening to you. You feel completely disrespected. And you're sad and anxious. And you'll say, yeah. And it really pisses you off. Yeah, I'm really pissed off. So number one, remember when people are highly emotional, they're alexithemic. They cannot state their own emotions. They have no capacity for stating their emotions. They are alexithemic. That's what alexithymia is. So when you are labeling their emotions, you're literally lending them your prefrontal cortex for the 90 seconds it takes for their prefrontal cortex to come back online, where they can access their emotional database and start understanding their own emotions. And so when they say, no, I'm not feeling this, they're not pushing back at you. They're struggling to figure out what it is they are feeling, and you're there helping them, and they're grateful for you to be there, listening to them, validating them, and working with them to help them get back in control. So you never make a mistake doing this. It's amazing.
Yeah, of course, exactly. Because when you say that, they're going to connect with you and like, oh, so they're giving more information. In psychology, we have what's called a Gestalt technique. A Gestalt is essentially a type of modality where you have the figure foreground aspect of it. So you become the voice of someone who can't say something, or you are able to personify something for someone else. So, for example, just like you're saying there, if someone can't find the words for it, I become the cognitive voice for them, or the emotional voice for them. Or if I'm doing a group therapy, it's the same type of thing. But you become the emotional voice for them so that they can externalize what they're saying. So therefore, then you can link with them not only at an emotional level, but then you are the voice or the megaphone for them, which then helps them externalize it, which then kind of wipes the board. They're now able to reset, just like you said, and are able to then have more of a healthier dialogue with somebody.
Right.
So great. I think I really appreciate your technique.
Same basic concept. Yeah. Except that we're working with emotions, and we're working with the difference between a lot of things you're talking about and what I do is this stuff's all grounded in neuroscience. It's how the brain actually processes information. And it's how the brain actually constructs emotions. Are you familiar with the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett out of Northeastern University, Constructed Theory of Emotions? She was very influential, not only Lieberman, but she's been very influential in my thinking. Basically, what she is saying is that we are not born with emotions. We construct emotions at a very young age, at 18 months, starting at about 18 months, and we build this emotional database. And when we become disconnected from the emotional database, we experience alexithymia. Then we fall back on old programming, reactive programming that's not functional anymore, and that's when things get really hairy and crazy. And so by affect labeling, you're reconnecting, helping them reconnect to that emotional database so they can take the affective experience they're experiencing and understand it as an emotional experience, and then be able to verbalize it, and then be able to self-regulate. And that's
so you found
going on.
And so you found with this, so it only just takes 90 seconds to be able to do that then.
Yeah, it's fast. It's really fast.
Yeah.
And we've seen it happen over and over and over again. I mean, this is the foundational skill in the Prison of Peace project. This turns out to be our foundational skill. The very first skill we teach our incarcerated populations when we're teaching this is the very first thing we teach them after we do a little bit of theoretical work around restorative justice, is to teach them how to listen other people into existence. And then our whole curriculum, all the way up to learning how to mediate a dispute, is foundationally based on the ability to listen to another person's emotions and calm them down.
Wow. So regardless if people are in high conflict, situations like yours, or in everyday conversations or, connection with their spouse or with their kids, this is something everybody can do all the time. Right. So use these use statements that you're talking about.
And it's not only negative emotions. I mean, this is something that I encourage parents to start doing this with their 3 and 4 year olds. I've had plenty of reports of parents who have told me that even at 2 years old, they start affect labeling their 2-year-old, and the temper tantrums disappear in about 3 or 4 months. And the research shows that if you start affect labeling your children at a very young age, 3, 4 years old, by the time they're 9 and 10, they're usually 2 grade levels academically ahead of all their peers. And they have the social maturity years and years in advance of their peers.
So it significantly increases one's emotional quotient, one's EQ, as far as how they essentially read the room.
Right. And the reason for that is because our emotional centers in our brain don't start maturing. They don't come online until about 18 months of age. And when you're acting as an emotional coach, as a parent, and you're affect labeling, reflecting back, and helping your child learn about emotions and build that emotional database and learn how to self-regulate and be self-aware, that feeds into the growth of the emotional centers of the brain. So it's like exercising. And their brains develop in a healthy, holistic way, which sets them apart from all other children who are growing up in invalidating environments where they're told that emotions are bad or evil. So that stunts the growth of the emotional centers of the brain. And, if they don't have the right kind of inputs at the right time, then it's past and there's nothing they can really do. Certainly. And that's the difference between a kid who has been affect labeled as a young child and a kid who grows up in, let's call it, a normal family where emotions are bad and evil and irrational, and they don't have that opportunity.
Yeah. With everything you do you teach people this outside of the actual moments? Do you on your website, etc.? Do you teach? Do you have classes?
I've got online courses. I do group coaching. I take on individual clients if they really want, and they have like leadership. I teach a lot of people in leadership who are really interested in developing their. Here's the cool thing, the benefit that comes from this. Not only are you calming down angry people, but what I've experienced and learned is that your emotional intelligence goes through the roof as you learn this. And this is completely backwards from the way everybody teaches emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is three basic components: emotional self-awareness, self-regulation, and the ability to have empathy, affective and cognitive empathy. And when we affect label, we're learning cognitive empathy. That's a form of cognitive empathy. It builds our own emotional self-awareness, which then allows us to self-regulate. And then it allows us to have even better, more accurate cognitive empathy. And eventually that translates into affective empathy, which is even faster and more powerful than cognitive empathy. Correct. And so it's a virtuous cycle of growth. And every single person that I've ever taught this just notices how their life completely changes as they do this. And as I teach leaders how to do this, they notice that their ability to walk into a group meeting and immediately read the emotions in the room and know exactly what to say, how to say it, when to say it, no matter how intense the situation, they have utter confidence in every situation, is extremely powerful.
That's fantastic. Douglas E. Noll, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. The time flew by. I enjoyed hearing so much about this information. If my listeners want to learn more about you and to work with you or to take some of these master classes, to find out more information about you, where will they find all this information online?
My basic website is dougnoll.com, but I have created a page for your audience. And that would be dougnoll.co, not com, but co, dougnoll.co/lifeology. And on that page, you can get a free ebook that describes everything that I've talked about. You can buy my fourth book, De-Escalate, How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less. You can get my De-Escalate video course. And if you really want to dive deep, you can get access to my Developing Emotional Competency courses.
Excellent. Well, Doug Noll, thank you so much. It's been a fantastic guest on my show today. My listeners and viewers also know that if they cannot find this information any other place, simply go to the show notes at jamesmillerlifeology.com, and I'll link you with Doug Noll's information. Thank you so much for being a great guest today.
Thanks, James.